Creativity is by definition creating something out of nothing.
If you're an artist, you learn that the thing that you think you're creating is not the thing that you end up creating.
The idea of failure in some ways is saying, I had an idea of what I thought needed to happen or what should happen, and it turned out differently. It's actually not failure at all.
This is what art does. Art gets to the soul, gets to the place where values, where relationships, where meaning is made. There's change, evolve, grow, stretch.
So here we're going to go into the supreme ordeal. The supreme ordeal is that period of our lives that just rages fire through us. It's though it burns everything away, leaves us truly, truly humbled. And when that fire rages through and burns away all of these certainties that we once had, it can actually lead towards an ability to be able to not need to hold on to anything and to really, truly let life flow. And this can lead to a life capacity of being able to live life fully in both the unknown and the unknowing, which can also be called living in negative capability.
You know, other people like to skim over it, like in the books that they write about the supreme ordeal. But we're going to, make it really real by continuing
We're going to make it an
to
ordeal. We're going to make everybody suffer with us for at least 2 episodes.
And we're going to do that by revealing our experiences of supreme ordeal. I mean, you've done more revealing than Jeff and I have. We've just alluded to it. So we thought we would, we were talking just earlier, and we thought we would just talk a little bit about the last 4 years, because it's been the supreme ordeal for us. And we have different, perspectives on it, but it's really also a story about the journey of entrepreneurship, because entrepreneurship is tough, and that's why a lot of people want to be employees and not entrepreneurs.
Because they're smarter than the rest.
Yeah,
exactly.
really, I was just going to say, there's something in that.
Yeah, but anyway, we just that's the journey we went on, and it's kind of like we didn't know we were choosing it until we were too far down it, kind of thing. Anyway, so Jeff, do you wanna kick it off?
Well, it's been a journey of entrepreneurship. It's also been a journey of relationship and
that's true.
And self-development. So you and I as individuals, you and I as a couple, and then this company and this business, and it's such a rich story. When I think about all of its intricacies and layers, we could go sort of way back and talk about how these different layers over time have woven together into this amazing knot of the last 4 years. But just to give the audience a picture, so in 2007, I helped start a company called Rios that supported our family until I left that company in 2014. And when I left, I assumed that with the networks, with the clients, with my visibility on the Rios website, with my continuing relationship to Rios, and we had a little bit of savings, there could be a transition into the new company. And it just didn't work that way at all. And not only didn't work that way, but it worked a whole other way that seemed to just get worse and worse and worse and worse. And so this was like a train smash in slow motion for 3 years of, number one, when I left the company, I had certain agreements set up, and those agreements fell apart soon after I left the company.
Well, because they changed their minds.
Yeah, they changed their mind. So I left the company with no payout. That was part of the initial setting up of the company, which I think was a mistake. But that was one condition. Another condition was I was going to be an associate, have an associate agreement. Well, shortly after I left, there was no associates anymore, and so on. So there were several things that we set up which just dissolved, and there wasn't anybody to blame. It's just that group of people changed their mind. They wanted to go a different direction, and that rendered our agreements for associate status and for sharing the email list moot. So we found ourselves within 6 months like having no visibility in the marketplace and having no email list to market to, and no work. And so all of those things just sort of petered out. Well, so then we spent our savings, and we had to do a few things. We had to build up a differentiating IP. So we had the beginning of it, but then we thought it was going to take 6 months or a year. It took us 3 years to actually coalesce our intuitions and our insights into a valuable, sort of a value-add set of tools and perspectives and approaches that could be differentiated in the marketplace.
Yeah, well, that's because we just had such a legacy it was a legacy that we kind of inherited. It wasn't just our IP, it was just this 100 years of researchers that were obscure to everybody in our field, social change and multi-stakeholder field. And we were trying to translate it into something digestible. And we didn't really realize how, so there's one time in our studio, in our office, we had these little snippets
little
from
bits of paper,
journals, and I don't know, from all this, like an atlas that we had compiled.
Each one with a kind of idea.
Wall. Yeah. And we had like 3 huge walls just covered in
snippets. Must have been
snippets.
2,000 little bits of paper.
Wow.
And this is a sort of an effort to try to bring this into something.
Yeah. And it was exhausting and it was brutal. And now I knew we would have to go through something like that. But it wasn't fun, and I think, and it got us to version 1, say, of WorldMaker. Well, now the version that we're about to release is internally version 7. And so the picture is what we thought was going to take 6 months or a year, and we were going to be able to float with our savings, took 3 or going on 4 years. In which case we went through our savings, and then we borrowed to the hilt personally, and then we had to borrow from family. And I was like, oh my God, what are we doing? And I just want to give the audience a picture of the kind of the grind of this, just night after night, day after day after day.
Sounds agonizing.
A worsening situation, but a gaining of clarity. So bit by bit by bit by bit, building up our own internal system and gradually getting something that we think is real, which is really good. Okay, this is really good. We finally began to take it to market in 2017. We're like, okay. And we had some work. We had 3 clients lined up. We had about $300,000 of work in the pipeline, not contracted, but all in the proposal phase. And in April, May, June of 2017, all 3 clients decided they were doing something else or didn't have any money. So again, the rug pulled out from under us. Like, no prospects, no momentum, just little bits and pieces of work. And at the same time, I made some time to talk with some very, I would say, mature people in our space, some people who have helped change the constitution of countries and things like that, real accomplished systems changers. And I was like, are we completely crazy, or are we on track with some of the stuff that we're talking about? And the feedback was, absolutely, you're totally on track, but you are ahead of the curve. I got positive feedback, but presenting to clients and foundations and so forth, they weren't ready, they didn't comprehend it, we didn't sell it well enough.
Yeah, and
so it was like, back down the vortex for another year of sheer hell.
But I have a perspective on why that was the case. And it had to do with we could not market. The tremendous struggle was making it clear to prospects why our thing was going to solve their pain. We knew it was going to, but they didn't get it. And that was because we, Jeff and Louisa, didn't have sufficient alignment in what we were doing. So,
between the two of us.
Yeah, so we didn't know that at the time.
Right.
But maybe you can speak to that.
Well, what we saw was in our presentation, we kept wondering, do we really want to do this work? Do we want to be consultants? Like, are we doing this because we know how to do it? Are we doing it because we really want to do it? We feel like this is our real calling. So again, it was going back to the calling and clarifying that and distilling that.
And very much, is this our life mission?
Yeah. Well, and, me feeling really clear about it, you not feeling clear about it.
Not at all.
And then we'd reverse, and Louisa would be up and I would be down. And we kind of learned that through these 3-4 years, we would just go through these cycles. And we got to know that, okay, Louisa's downward spiraling now, so Jeff's going to come in and support and talk her off the ledge and hold the fort. And, the darkness passes, and then she comes back around, and then I go into my tailspin, and I'm like, I'm shit, I'm no good, I'm like, what am I doing with my life? And then I would come out of that, and we just learned, okay, we gotta keep our heads out of that spiritual gutter. It doesn't help to just despair. But it was like at a certain point, my stress circuits just burned out. My hair, I had dark hair, and then I got flecked with gray, and the wrinkles came out, and it was like, I after a certain time, I just couldn't feel that much anxiety anymore, because I had exhausted my ability to feel anxious. I mean, I was still anxious, but I was pretty relaxed about feeling anxious or something. I just didn't feel that degree of inner despair and fear. So that was a good turning point to say, okay, we are now in what John Keats called negative capability, which is the ability to endure uncertainty indefinitely.
And that's exactly what it was like. We had to endure this tremendous uncertainty, financial uncertainty,
identity,
psychic
Are we doing the
uncertainty.
right thing? Is this really our work?
Yeah, and it was like, it was also a kind of burning away of the dross, because it was forcing us to peel away these layers. I mean, I just remember peeling away a layer and feeling so raw and fresh. And then we were still in that space. I'm like, oh no, there's another layer that I don't know about. And then peel away another layer. And again, just this release of like, I just learned something. But then we were still there. So it's like, oh my God, there's more layers. Yeah. And this went on and on and on.
And ultimately realizing that we had this expectation that things were supposed to work in a certain amount of time, which you've mentioned before, Matthew, and realizing that, okay, we're just going to have to shift inwardly and make ourselves prepare to surf this uncertainty indefinitely. And so that, there was moments of like, okay, I think I can ride this out. 40 years, 45 years from now, I'll be dead. But like, that's not that long a time to live in uncertainty and poverty. Like, I think I can do this,
That's so terrible.
No, I mean, it was terrible, but it was like,
but it's so super important.
I had to get there.
Yeah.
I had to get there and realize that, maybe my life wasn't about what I thought it was going to be about. Maybe it's not about this inevitable fame and glory and outcome and stuff. And maybe it's just a slow motion train wreck forever, right? And I was like, well, I'm sure that it has some purpose in all of my many incarnations. I better just be present. I better just give up trying to force it to be something that it's not. And this is what my point in an earlier episode is like, when you're down there, like David Lynch talked about in The Failure of Dune, down there it's beautiful. I was trying to find the beauty. I could not find the beauty until I stopped fighting.
Just like your
wave.
Yeah, your wave.
Right?
Yeah.
And this sounds all very Buddhist and very like cool, and it deserves to be written in calligraphy on a beautiful poster with a nature photograph. But being in it isn't obvious. It isn't a switch to flick. It isn't like, okay, now I'm at peaceful because I have this idea, this conceptual understanding. It was a burning away and a grinding down and an utter dissolution of all of the holding on and the structures and the expectations. They were just ground down. And it took 3 years to grind them into nothingness.
So let's just catalogue that, right? So there was fantasy that was ground down. There was egoity and the great me that was ground down. Expectations. Assumptions. What else was like...
Beliefs about myself, about where we were going.
So what came out of it?
Totally gone.
Ungroundedness. So it forced us to become very present, and also it created a sense of, I would say the word flexibility, right? Because if you can somehow have 7 different worldviews or beliefs before breakfast, right? You're not attached to how you see the world, which means you can be more open and flexible about, well, maybe my particular perspective on this situation is actually the problem.
There's a subtle point here, which our listeners may be kind of firing off with, which is you just need to follow best practice. What you need is really good business smarts, really good business advice, and just like implement that business advice. And we did. We both got really good business advice. We have a whole bookshelf of business books, and we were applying this knowledge, and it made logical sense what we were doing, but it still wasn't working. And that is when we saw that, okay, if that's not working, that seems like the right thing to do. Where are we not aligned in ourselves and as a pair, as partners? Because obviously, we're tripping ourselves up somewhere. We're not presenting the cell in a really grounded way that other potential client can see value, or we're not reaching the right people. So it wasn't just a kind of tactical or strategic or logistical problem. It was really a kind of inner problem that we had to solve with inner tools. Anyway, so pick it up, Matthew.
Yeah, so I just want to go back to what you were saying about the 7, having 7 different worldviews before breakfast. That's a great little Alice in Wonderland quote, but it actually is. I actually feel like the key in some ways to stepping in and embarking on this journey through the Supreme Ordeal, actually, right? Because I think one of the reasons why we can one of the ingredients in the Supreme Ordeal is the holding on to this thing we are so sure about.
Yeah. It's the very thing that you have to let go of.
Exactly. And as we were sort of in our 20s, and for you guys in your early 30s, as we knew each other in the inception, as our relationship magically crossed paths again in New England. Yeah. We were all so certain, right? The conversations that we had.
Right, we had big plans.
We had big plans, but the way that we saw the world, we were all so certain about. Right? Yeah. I've just read Philosophy of Freedom for the 5th time, and I've come to this new understanding, and this is the one. Yeah. Right? And ultimately, we keep coming to this is the one. And very often, I think what happens is, I know happened with me, is that the thing that I believed so firmly would then shift. At a certain point, one can look back far enough and say, oh, wait a second, there were all these things that I was so certain about that I now see things so differently, which means where I stand right now, at some point I'm going to have a lot more knowledge and understanding and experience. And I can look back at this moment, guaranteed, and see that a lot of the things that I am so sure about now, I won't be sure about anymore. Yeah,
and across the course of a lifetime, you're shifting your perspective hugely. And you mentioned 360 degrees sometimes, and I mentioned reversal in the past. Like sometimes what you believe now, and you're so sure about it, you find that the opposite is actually true for you, or something.
Yeah, and the idea, and I'm tying that back into the 7 worldviews before breakfast. Yeah. Ultimately, part of going through that Supreme Ordeal, I think, is in some ways, is actually learning that all of these worldviews that we have had over time, that we've held on to, we can actually have all those before breakfast. Yeah. Right? And then we can move on. We can have our breakfast.
And that, what you're describing, is a capability. It's not necessarily given to us to be able to do this, but this is the kind of the pictures that you were giving is so important if we want to be able to cross the divides where there is conflict. Right. How we can save a marriage, how we can talk with people who are our enemies. Because if we can only have one worldview, the one that we were given as children, we will never really be able to have peace in this world.
Right. I spent a few years, this was a major part of my meditative work, was taking everything that I thought and that I was sure about, actually, and to find how I could see the opposite being true as well. Right? And this even came when I was having a struggle with something. If I was upset about something, if I was trying, if there was an area of conflict with somebody or in some area, I couldn't write a frustration or sort of journal. My journaling was not only to write the thing that was wrong that I saw, but the mirror of that and what was right. How do I let go of my grip on the way I think it should be? Right? The thing that I'm so certain about that I can say, well, maybe the opposite is totally true at the same time. It's the 1 in 12. Right?
Yeah, so this is, the exercise, like you can exercise trying to develop this flexibility of the soul by, putting it into reverse, or like deliberately putting it into its reverse. Yeah. You've left us, hanging off of a cliff. So.
Well, that's the feeling that that I had for 2.5 years. Is just white knuckling and hanging off a cliff over the abyss.
Yeah, holding on with your bare nails.
Yeah, that's how it was, and I described that to you and the family and so forth because increasingly it looked like there was no solution. So we kept trying to solve the problem with different moves, different efforts, let's try this. And
let's get out of consulting.
Yeah, let's stop doing this, let's start. And all of our solutions were not working. So I guess I just got to a point of realizing that if there's going to be a solution, it's not going to come from me. I can't think or act my way out of this, and I just let go. I just went into that tailspin, and my exercises became about letting go. And so instead of going from one worldview or one idea or one tactic and strategy to the next, just to let go of all firmness. Now, I think what was important in that is not to let go of hope and structure and inner stability. Right?
And also inner practice. You are practicing your way through.
So don't grab a hold of despair. Don't grab a hold of fear. Just don't grab, right? And then what happens if we just kind of let things go and let things come? And then that was like the last half of 2017, and I think in there, our puppy accidentally ate some poison at a ranch. We never found out what poison, but she died we tried to save her, and it took her 6 months, and finally had to put her down. We had a close friend of the family die, and one of our family members was right there with him when he unexpectedly drowned. And that tragedy was last summer, and we had all the friends and family here in the house. So there was just, not only had our client work gone away, but then there were these deaths in our immediate family and community that we helped host, and we helped facilitate the grieving of that after that. So in the latter half of last year, I felt like I had been through something that I couldn't articulate, but the image that comes to mind is Gandalf's fight with the Balrog, when he returns, he doesn't need to talk about it or explain who he is. He just is now Gandalf the White. And alchemical images, there's the 7 esoteric birds, which describe spiritual growth. And one of them is, the third bird is the peacock, who talks a lot about all of his knowledge and shows his beautiful fan. And then the 4th stage is the pelican, who rubs her breast and bleeds for her young. Doesn't really bleed
in real life, but it looked like
that's
that.
But it does redden to warm the chicks. So there's this gesture of sacrifice. And the next bird is the swan, who is mute, because the swan has seen the mountain or seen God and can't talk about it, doesn't have the desire to talk about it. So the contrast between the peacock and the swan. And I felt so beaten down and pulverized, but also purified. He's being born in me now. But definitely there's a corpse there too. There's a way of being and thinking and desiring and being anxious that feels to me like it's a dead puppet. And I cannot animate that way of being anymore. It is dead. And what's being born is not yet fully clear. So, so for me, that transitions to the question of the fruit of the supreme ordeal being kind of emerging now. And certainly my daily practice, my journaling, my sleep time, what I think about in the night, kind of intuitively, is what emerging, the phoenix arising from all these ashes, what is now possible that wasn't possible before. And that's very exciting because I can kind of feel that there is real capacity and potential and strength there, but I also don't have a grip on it. Like I'm not tying it to expectations of worldly success because that puppet's dead, right? I can't run this new energy through the old bag, through the old way of being. I can't tie it to my ego. I can't tie it to my expectations, and when I slip into old habits and ways of being, it feels so wrong. It's like, I don't want to do that anymore, because that is exactly what wore me out and punished me so permanently in the last few years. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I am so sick of myself that I am now ready to be something else that I don't really know what it is. And so now I'm kind of like sweeping out those ashes and like getting, like I'm just in that stage of like letting that fully die and being kind of like day by day and then not yet here. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's kind of how I'm living right now.
Yeah. One thing I want to say in there, and that is, there's a quote, and I don't remember who said it, maybe you guys can remember, but some martial artist master said, the master has failed more times than the beginner has even tried. And I don't want to imply that I believe I'm a master. Continual trying and failing, and adjusting, and trying and failing and adjusting, right? And peeling away the layers, and the kind of, you have to go through it. The supreme ordeal. It's almost like the supreme ordeal is not something that you can change, influence, stop. Bypass, avoid. You have to go through it, and it's going to be relentless until you get to where you need to go. And I am at the point now where I feel such equanimity in the face of strife. Like it's really no problem for me to peel away the layers. Like, oh, right, I have another layer. I just gotta peel it away. Oh, they're so cool. Look at that. You know, It's not the brutal, like ravaging
flesh peeling thing that it was.
What is that? Flaying. Doesn't
Yeah.
feel like a flaying in the same way. And
Just feels more like a hot bath.
yeah, it's like
clean this up.
Yeah, it really does. And failure, it doesn't feel as it felt. It's like, nope, this is just power for the course. Try something. It's like prototyping now, and it really has been this shift in perspective.
You know, we talk about failure, which is in some ways a funny word to use because we're still going, right? So you know, we attribute the idea of failure in some ways as saying I had an idea of what I thought needed to happen or what should happen or what I wanted to do, and it turned out differently, and we call that failure.
Yes, we do.
Which is a bit interesting, right?
Yeah.
Because it's actually not failure at all.
Except for when it is, but okay.
It depends on the end result, right?
Yeah.
If the end result is great, then you're an artist and it turned out differently because you know how to create things and you know that it's going to turn out differently. But if it's a disaster and you've wasted your resources and you're feeling really shitty and it's like, oh my God, what am I doing with my life? Then we call it failure.
We do, right. But we call a lot of things failure, you know, and one of my favorite movie quotes ever is from The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel when Deb Patel is talking to Judi Dench and she's feeling forlorn. He says, everything, I forget, now I'm going to paraphrase, it's all good in the end. And if it's not good, it's not the end. Where everything works out in the end. If it hasn't worked out, it's not the end. Right? Which is a little bit of this piece in how we think about our failures. Right? Or that in some ways, once again, it's a shift in perspective. And I'll relate this to someone like Michael Jordan, right? Who I think he missed in his career 26 game-winning shots, or what would have been game-winning shots, right?
There's quite a few.
That meant that there 26 times they were down by 1, 2, or 3, or I guess a game winning would have been right. By 1 or 2, and he missed the shot. Right. But yet, who do you always give the ball to when you're down by 1 or 2 points?
Yeah,
you give it to Michael Jordan. Duh, right? So we look at that as the failure, but there's this bigger piece, right? Which is that each of those misfires is not actually, you know, you lose the game, but we're not in it just to win a game. When we hit these challenging times, you know, we're going to shoot and we're going to miss 26. The best is going to miss 26 times.
Yeah.
Right?
So you're saying context matters?
So it's context matters, but we actually give the context to it. Sometimes the context is given to us. When the context is given to us in a way that we don't want it, we can actually give the context into the event or the ordeal.
Yeah. So it's really so much about mindset. And mindset is something that you can't just flick a switch and say, okay, now, you know, if you just looked at this differently, it will feel different. Well, just to come back to having a daily practice where you're focused on your thinking life and helping yourself get more present in your thoughts and less scattered and less this constant stream of consciousness that is telling you all kinds of not very nice things about yourself to you that you're believing in a part of you, but you get some.
You mean your voices of self-doubt, of self-hatred, and voices of self-judgment?
Exactly.
Yeah.
All of that going on in your mind that you may not even be aware of, right? So just spending a few moments of noticing and concentrating on something other than that, and then a few minutes just every day, a little bit like a homeopathic dose or a tiny little intervention in your feeling life, so that you're not constantly at the mercy of your feelings, but you actually practice deliberately calling up a feeling of peace or joy, right? And then in your will, that where you're noticing your will and you're playing with it, you're working with it, so that you're not at the mercy of your impulses all the time, or your compulsions. So shifting your perspective in that way, it takes work.
Yeah.
It's not something that you can just do. You have to set up for it. You have to practice. You have to train. So what we're talking about, this getting through the ordeal, it's making martial artists out of us.
Yeah.
Well, I just don't want to skip over this. What I think is such an important point. I mean, for me at least. When caterpillars create cocoons and become butterflies, what's curious about that is that in the cocoon, the caterpillar turns to liquid. Absolutely. And there's only a few cells that carry over from the caterpillar to the butterfly, but no form does. No legs, no internal organs, no brains. It just turns to liquid. And I think, in my experience of these kinds of ordeals, there's a kind of analog that, yes, I kept doing the practice. Yes, I kept shifting my mindset. And in my experience, at least, there was a need to absolutely and repeatedly and fundamentally, for months on end, stop trying to fix it. And so what you're describing as these rhythmic practices, I think they build in those seeds of the future. Those butterfly seeds is what those cells are called in the caterpillar. We do these practices not because they're going to get us out of that liquid, total chaotic stage, but because when that finally relents, because, I don't know, enough seasons go by and you've slept on it enough, or the stars change, or whatever it is, the wind blows a different direction, eventually those seeds of practice build new organs, and eventually you become a new person. But in that moment, it's hard to say, oh, okay, I'm doing this so that I'm going to get this, and this is going to give me this, and then I'll get out of this. Because all those plans just fall apart.
Right. How do you even go through that with a sense of, even with all the difficulty, maybe I should speak for myself, going through that, there was actually some joy in that. There was some joy in the pain, in the same way when I'm lifting weights and I'm like, oh, I can't get this up, but I got to do one more. Yeah. It hurts and I'm sore and I don't want to do it and I'd rather be doing anything else. But there's still a bit of joy in
that wasn't my experience. No, the joy. So I think I can totally get why that was your experience, because you have always struck me as having this. Like the glass is always half full for you, and it's not really in you. Maybe in times of real struggle,
distress,
maybe you might be tempted to see the glass is half empty. But no, you're This is your whole being understands this glass is half full kind of way to look at the world. You've always done that with your children. You've done that whenever you speak about any challenge in your life. It's always from this more joyful, more positive point of view. You don't diminish the suffering. It's just how you are. It's just who you are. And you're about the only person I know, I think, who's like that. Yeah, I think so.
So this isn't normal.
No, it's not normal. No, I don't think so.
I mean, the first time I went through a life-shattering ordeal, I did find the joy in the pain. I resonated with that Lynch quote of, it's so beautiful down here. In my second time...
Not so much, maybe?
It was a different kind of thing. I was participating in something that wasn't about my feeling about it. And my feeling about it, whether joyous or sadness, was getting in the way. And so just to see it for what it is, and to go through it, and to feel joy about letting go of my addiction to happiness or contentment, my need to be content and whole. There was a certain joy, or not even joy, but just like a feeling of release from that habit that gave a sense of spaciousness. but it was like, it was the kind of thing that I think I'll be glad that I went through, but I wouldn't want to wish on anybody.
It's almost like you were looking for the objective in it.
Yeah, so I've always felt like after we die, we must look back on our lives much more objectively than we can when we're living them. And there were many, many days that I just felt in the last, year and a half, especially with the just culmination of this ordeal, where I just felt like I'm being shown something here that I need to be able to see without a like-dislike relationship to it.
Without
liking
sympathy
it,
or antipathy.
Yeah, without any judgment.
Just witnessing.
I just need to see it so that it can shape me, shapes my learning. And can I live enough in that to not be happy or unhappy with it? Not to have a point of view. Don't have a point of view on your own suffering.
Right.
Just see it for what it is, and then all of a sudden you can see, wow, I'm in the freaking cocoon. This is what's happening. Don't know what I'm becoming. Does the caterpillar know it's becoming a butterfly? I mean, it does give itself willingly to this cocoon. And at some level, I was sort of there. So so yes to the practices, yes to the perspective shifts, and yes to the day after day of not knowing.
Negative capability.
If and when this was going to relent and become something. Living with that question is a capability. That's how I've kind of come out of this thinking.
Well, let me just put a finer point on that negative capability, because this is one of our big teaching points or tools.
It comes from a letter that John Keats wrote his cousin. We paraphrase it as enduring uncertainty indefinitely.
Yeah. So the work that we've been doing with social labs and multi-stakeholder change processes, one of the reasons why Jeff left Rios is because this capability, this ability to live indefinitely with a certain amount of equanimity in the unknowing is a really core capability of doing social change work. Yeah. If you can't do that, then you will snap back. So systems don't want to change. And when you're trying to intervene, a social system. So if you're trying to intervene in a social system, it requires an enormous amount of complexity and an enormous amount of not knowing. And if you can endure that, you have a fighting chance of making a change in that system. Going through a process of complexity in whatever it is that you're doing, if you're trying to create anything, whether it's a piece of art or whether it's a new social reality, this is an integral part of the experience.